Welcome to Let's Talk About Your Guns, a podcast where we explore how to have tough conversations about storing firearms safely. Conversations that could save a life. I'm Kurt West, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Scientist at the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress at the Uniformed Services University. In 2023, nearly 15.9 million firearms were sold legally in the United States. In that same year, almost 43,000 people died from gun-related injuries. Over half of those deaths were suicides. Today, we'll be asking the question of what role gun retailers can play in suicide prevention. In this episode, I'll be talking with Jacquelyn Clark, who owns Bristlecone Shooting, Training, and Retail Center in Lakewood, Colorado. I'll also be talking with Caleb Morse, owner of the Rustic Renegade in Lafayette, Louisiana. Today's conversation is about the point of sale and the role those conversations have in suicide prevention and safe firearm storage. Jacquelyn, Caleb, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Jacquelyn, one of the things I'm curious about, and I think our listeners would like to hear about, is tell us a little bit about Bristlecone.
Sure. Bristlecone is an indoor shooting range, firearms retailer, training facility, gunsmiths, lots of things under one roof. We've been operating for 10 years. It's me and my husband that own and operate it. It's a 20,000 square foot facility. Our goal really, when we opened it, was to create a really non-intimidating, friendly environment for shooters of all levels. So from the people we hire to our instructors to the vibe and the paint colors, we really want to make sure that people that come in receive a very high level of customer service, but also feel comfortable. Guns are intimidating enough. And so we try very hard to remove as much intimidation as we can.
So Caleb, can you tell us a little bit about your background and the Rustic Renegade?
I didn't grow up around firearms. My mother is scared to death to this day of firearms. So I didn't have one in the house, went hunting with friends and their dads. When I was 17 years old, I started working at a gun shop, and I was there until I joined the Army. Fast forward, left the military, went work overseas for a little while, came back, and a great buddy of mine I had met through a Bible study offered me the opportunity to use his building to kind of open my own shop. And then it just progressed into where we are today. Our store is about 5,000 square feet, and we've just built this community of people that aren't exactly like-minded, but they're like-hearted, if that makes sense. Our ethos, our motto at the shop is showing the grown boys of Acadiana what grown men look like. We believe in leading from the front, and we believe that you have to be who you say you are. So if we want to be pillars in the community, we do things in the community. We don't just work with firearm industry-related projects such as Ducks Unlimited and everything else. We've invested ourselves in our community and neighboring communities to make it a better place, where most of the gun shops that I grew up going to, they were there to sell wares.
Okay, so both Bristlecone and the Rustic Renegade offer this ability for people to come in and store firearms on site. One of the things we talk about in this podcast is having that plan for alternate storage of your firearms when you hit a rough patch and you don't think you should have them around. What experiences led you to offer this service to your customers?
We got involved with the Colorado Firearm Safety Coalition pretty quickly after we opened, and that is a group of involved and interested firearms retailers, range owners, also some mental health professionals, folks with Firearms Injury Prevention Initiative at the University of Colorado. So a large group of people who definitely have different political views, but everybody agrees we need fewer gun deaths in the state of Colorado. Being involved with that group really opened our eyes to the level of need that was out there. So we began offering storage because we wanted to make an impact locally to, again, take that trusted community feel to the next level and offer something that was clearly needed in the community.
What about you, Caleb? What got you started offering storage for your customers?
I had a good friend of mine that I served with, and he was going through this existential crisis, and this shows up with all of his firearms. And he's like, Caleb, look, I want you to hold these firearms. I want you to take these firearms. I don't need any anymore. And one of the things that you learn through the military is, hey, look, if someone starts trying to give away their stuff, that's a big clue. So I talked to him, and I'm like, look, man, let's figure this out. because I think you're going through something right now that we need to talk about. So I told him I was going to grab some coffee for he and I. Went in the back, grabbed coffee, and he was gone. And he left his firearms. So I took his firearms in, put them in my inventory, and started trying to call him. He never answered the calls. And that kind of snowballed into probably a week, 2 weeks later, someone came in. They were like, hey, I heard you held firearms for a friend of yours. I'm going through a problem. Would you mind helping me? I'm like, well, sure, I can do that. We'll figure out a way. And it just kind of built upon there where word got out that I was doing things in the community to help people, and the good word spread fast.
I think that's kind of fascinating to me, this idea that you did this for one person and it was just a spontaneous thing, and suddenly you built it and they came. Jacquelyn, Caleb, what kind of storage options do you offer?
We offer 2 different types of storage. At my shop, we have lockers, which has one type of procedure for the customers. And then we also have a regular temporary storage program where the guns are stored with the rest of our inventory. And it just depends on availability and space and what the customer's needs are in terms of what solution we pair them with.
I don't do the lockers just because I technically have the space for it, but I don't know how it is in Colorado, but the average person in Louisiana owns quite a few firearms. And if they're going through some kind of instance, one locker is not enough. So we do our temporary hold where he goes through our books, goes through the entire legal process, and we have some verbiage in a contract that we sign with the individuals stating that we are required to give them their firearms back.
So I'm curious, when somebody comes in and they say, look, I want you to hold these, or I want to store these with you for a period of time, can you tell me what the process is like?
So for us, it's never someone that just walks in and says, hey, look, this is it. Time out for safety. I need you to hold my guns. That has never happened. People normally come in and they're like, look, I have a friend and he's going through a divorce or she's going through a divorce and this is what's happening. And if they wanted to use the program, how would it work? And my staff has had some training and everything else, but for that kind of stuff, they're like, well, we'll let you talk to Caleb. I'll talk to him and I'm like, well, this friend of yours, are they about 6 foot tall with a beard? Yeah, it's me. And this is what I'm thinking about. And they probe you in the beginning to see if you are who they assume you are, because they want to know they can trust you, because they want to make sure they can get their firearms back. So it's always that conversation in the beginning. And it's, look, yeah, we're here. We can hold your firearms, but that's not where it stops. I want to get you help. And look, I'm not required to do that. That's just, I believe that we need to do something more than just hold them. And normally it's about a week-long process where they come back and forth a few times, and then they get comfortable enough and they say, okay, look, I want you to hold my firearms. And they come in, and they can come in anywhere from 1 firearm to the most we've had someone come in with is well over 100. We try to have a timeline set up for the bigger quantities. Sit down, do it in private, because it's an emotional roller coaster, and I don't want to embarrass anybody and add to that roller coaster. So we make sure that it's a very personal moment in time. We want to make sure someone feels comfortable about it. We want to make sure that we're giving them more help than just a place to store them. So we stay in communication with most of the people after the fact. Once they come back and pick their firearms up, we talk to them like, hey, how's life going? What's going on now? Are you still doing this? Is this going on? Because we want to make sure that people's lives are better.
We have a little bit of a different process. One of the things that I purposely train my staff to do is not to ask a lot of questions. So I think that sounds like the biggest fundamental difference between how we run our temporary storage and what Caleb's doing. And it's for a variety of reasons. We have about 25 people on staff, and we have an average amount of turnover for retail operation. We provide them with training, but they're not, highly trained mental health professionals. And so if we don't always know why someone is storing firearms with us, it does remove some of the liability for us on the back end in terms of giving them back to the customer. It also, in my mind, can help reduce some of the stigma. So if somebody comes in with some firearms they want to store, great. We train our staff not to ask any questions and to take them in and to talk to them about which solution would fit them better, either the locker, and they explain the difference between the procedure with the lockers and then the procedure with the other temporary storage program that we have in place where the firearms are stored with the rest of our inventory. All that being said, sometimes people do offer why they want to store their firearms. And I would say in 95% of the situations where they tell us why they want to store them, they're very mundane reasons. My grandkids are coming to town and I don't have a good place to put my guns in my house while they're staying with me for 2 months. Or I'm being deployed, or I have a new roommate and I don't know, how they feel about guns, so I want to store them for a couple months till we figure it all out. And then there are times where someone will offer that they are in trouble or their loved one is in trouble. And then that's where the training that the staff has comes into play. We want to be able to put those folks in touch with the right resources and make sure that they're getting the help that they need beyond just storing their firearms. We had one pretty memorable situation where a mother came in with a bunch of guns. They were her sons. He was a vet and he was going through a rough patch and she wanted him out of the house. She was really worried about him. And there were a number of them, so we couldn't put her in a locker. So our temporary storage procedure that's not the lockers requires the customer to sign an affidavit saying it's their guns. And they weren't her guns. So we had this little bit of a procedure hang up, in the face of somebody who really was in crisis. We ended up working it out. Her son came back to the shop and he didn't want to come inside because he thought it would be triggering. So we met him in the parking lot. He filled out the paperwork. We took the guns and he was on his way to get some help and felt good about the solution that was there for him. It becomes a little bit scary for a dealer to give those guns back, because we're not really qualified to determine whether or not that person has gotten the right amount of help in the 30, 60, 90 days that they've been storing the guns.
I'd like to shift the discussion to what you both do to stop firearms suicide. So my assumption and my experience with retailers I've spoken with is that nobody wants to know that they sold someone a firearm that was then used in a suicide. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about the role of your business in reducing the risk that that firearm that you sold is going to be used in a suicide.
You're absolutely right. Everybody agrees. We don't want more suicides. We don't want any suicides. We don't want to be the dealer that sells a gun to somebody who is used for that reason. When we came into the firearms industry, I had no idea what the suicide statistics were within the firearms community. I was just shocked when we entered this industry what the numbers were. And it's not because people in the firearms community have more mental health problems. It's because they have more access to guns in a time where they are in crisis that becomes a really lethal means. Probably the biggest thing that we do to prevent that from happening with firearms that we transfer or sell are the conversations. So, a customer comes in to buy a gun. The signs that indicate that they're in a state of mental crisis can be similar to the signs that they might show for a straw purchase, which is something that our staff is highly trained around. So, people that don't want to engage in a conversation, they're not really interested in trying the gun first before they buy it. They come in with a bunch of cash, that they're in a hurry. They just want to get something and get out, not really engaged. Those are all warning signs. We take a very conservative approach. And if a staff member is not comfortable making a transfer or making a sale, we absolutely don't do it. We always ask them to get a second opinion because we can sell guns to people that maybe don't mesh extremely well with the salesperson or aren't their same personality type. So we tell them to get a manager to come over and talk to that person or give them a second opinion. But we're not going to sell or transfer a firearm to anybody that we have any concerns about, period.
Oh, yeah, and to reiterate, no firearm dealer wants to have a firearm that was used in any homicide, and suicide is self-homicide. So the way we impact it is having those difficult conversations. We've become a place where people will come into our shop, maybe not necessarily wanting storing their firearms, just looking for help. And they'll come in, talk to the staff, and all of my staff has gone through multiple training sessions with the VA on suicide prevention and how we have these conversations. And what we've learned for our customer base, it's very direct conversations. And the people that I've had the discussions with, they appreciate the directness. Because when they try to talk to their family's like, it's okay. It's okay. You'll be fine tomorrow. And the truth is, you may not be fine tomorrow. You're not guaranteed your tomorrow, especially if you're in that point. So we have the conversations with people. It's showing people that, look, we're here no matter what.
This podcast is about promoting conversations about safe storage. What are the conversations that you and your staff have with individuals purchasing firearms? What are the conversations that you have about storing those weapons safely?
So when we're selling a firearm, it's a different type of conversation, right? Because if they come in and they're like, look, I want a handgun. We're not going to go up to the wall and be like, here, buy this. We call it fitting someone for a firearm. It's, well, okay, what role do you want it to fill? And then we have these conversations where they come in, they're like, look, I'm recently divorced and I hate my soon-to-be ex-husband and I need something, I think he's going to attack me. Well, okay. Well, then we have a conversation before we have a conversation, right? To see where they are maybe and kind of direct things. And we've told people, look, I don't think right now it's the best time for you to buy this firearm. How about we sell you some pepper spray and then we look at training and we kind of go that direction. That's happened more often than them just coming and buying something.
So it sounds like you're recognizing somebody's looking for this sense of safety. They're looking for a sense of control over a situation where they feel unsafe. You as the firearm dealer recognize this may not be the safe situation in which you should introduce a firearm.
You know, we all have a certain amount of tools. We all have a certain amount of things we can go to, and the firearm should always be the last thing.
What about how they store them at home? So in other words, when they take them home from your shop, and so this is kind of a question for both of you about what do you talk about in terms of how do you keep this weapon safe in your home environment?
Federal law mandates that new firearms are shipped and come in a lock in their box, and that used firearms, you provide a lock with them. That being said, most of the locks that come with your firearms are trash. So it's, look, if you want to have quick access to it for security and for safety, look at these different methods of storage, be it a gun vault or concealment furniture. We do custom furniture, so we have all this other stuff that we go with it. And then it's, well, how do you balance securing it and access to it? We have multitudes of conversations with it, and I'm sure it's very similar to what you do.
It's a good analogy because I have this personal experience recently. You know, if somebody comes in for a firearm, they need much more than the firearm. They need all of the things that help it, you know, work and be safe and help them understand how to use it. I went to Home Depot recently to buy a screen door. I don't know anything about screen doors, or I knew like the dimensions I needed, but I didn't know anything. I asked for help from an associate, and the guy sold me the screen door. I got home. There was nothing. There was like no hardware to install it. There wasn't really good directions. I was so mad that I left that store without what I needed to make this thing work. Our staff, we do and train them and incentivize them to sell everything that the person needs with the gun that they're buying. So that includes ammunition, training, a cleaning kit, and storage. So they do ask questions about what they're going to be using the firearm for. Is it something they're going to keep at home? Are they going to get carried on them? Is it something that's going to be in their car? And then we have a variety of different storage options that are good solutions depending on how they're using it, where they're keeping it, and who else is in the home. There's also a law in Colorado they passed, 21, I think, that requires people to store firearms safely in their home, and it requires retailers to post different signage in addition to the locks that are federally required to go out with every firearm. So people in Colorado are starting to be more aware of the need for secure storage in the home.
In Louisiana, they had talked about mandating to where you had to have a safe, like a state-approved safe. And then our senators came out and said, well, we already require them to do unauthorized person access and prevention. And what that means is whatever the homeowner wants. Like if you want to store it in your top drawer of your dresser drawer, that's fine. But you have to some way, shape, or form prevent others from getting access to it. And what that honestly means is you're in charge of your house. So it's up to you how you want to store them. It's up to you how you want to have access to them. And a lot of people do gun cabinets in South Louisiana. They do safes, they do everything else. But it's the individual homeowner's right and their ability to do what they want in their own home. A lot of the times when we have that conversation, it's with the individual say, look, man, if you want to have access to it in a hurry because you're worried about a lot of break-ins in your neighborhood or this and that, this is a great way to do this. But at the same time, you need to recognize that you're not always on your A game every day of the week. And if that's the case, then we might want to add a few more layers in there just to give yourself some safety and benefit from yourself. Because the threats aren't always outside, sometimes they're inside as well.
Jacquelyn, what are your thoughts about the safe storage and putting in barriers to suicide risk?
Luckily, the types of customers that come into my shop, the types of customers that come into Caleb's, they want to be responsible firearms owners. You know, they're in it for the education. One of the ways that we have that longer conversation is in our classes. So we teach intro to pistol, intro, level classes across all three platforms, concealed carry classes, other general firearm safety classes. And we have a couple of slides that are in every one of those classes that talks about the suicide statistics in Colorado, because they're higher than the rest of the country, and what it means to have access to lethal means and how safely storing things and keeping unauthorized people away from a firearm can make a difference. And it's interesting to see people make that connection. I don't think a lot of them automatically make it without someone talking to them about it.
What about if they've got kids at home? How emphatic are you in the discussion about safety?
We have those conversations daily. Oftentimes when we're talking to someone buying a firearm, we talk about their kids and if they want to hunt with them, if they want to go shooting with them, if they want to target practice. And it's removing that stigma, but still at the same time letting them know that they're still children. My kids at very young ages could disassemble, reassemble, load and unload almost every firearm in the shop, but they're still kids. When I was very young, I was in gifted mathematics class, and I'm still the same kid that put a pine needle in an electric socket, right? So just because you're smart doesn't mean that you should do everything and anything. So it's realizing that the same capacity they have for everything good in us, our children have the same capacity to be just complete and utter morons every once in a while.
Yeah, and I think not only kids, but aging adults can become unauthorized. The need for secure storage and who's authorized and unauthorized might change over time. So I think that's another part of the conversation that's important. Your need for storage now might be different than what it is in 10 years when your family situation changes.
I love that you brought up aging adults because I've had multiple customers come in, and one that stands out, he's a lawyer, and he's like, look, my mother has dementia and she doesn't want us to take her gun away. It was his dad's growing up and it's been in her family for this long. And he's like, hey, can you just sell me some blanks? And I was like, you want me to sell you blanks? He goes, yeah, that way she feels safe. I'm like, that's a great idea. We will give your mother a way to protect herself, load it with blanks, and the day that she needs it, she'll produce it, and it does nothing, and now you've put her in a horrible position. I was like, wouldn't it be better to have a conversation with your mom today? And he was like, oh, I really didn't want to do that. And it's just, we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
I want to throw just one broad question out, and I'm interested to hear your ideas. Are there additional things that gun dealers should be doing that will help reduce firearm suicides?
Well, should and ought are two different terms, right? So I believe there are things that we ought to do. I don't like should because should means that, in my mind, that the federal government has to mandate it. So there are things that we ought to do on our own. We have very serious conversations with people that others are afraid to have very serious conversations with. At the end of the day, we have to find that balance. And I think the best thing that we can do as firearm dealers is just be open to have a two-way dialogue and to communicate with our customer base.
Yeah, I would agree with Caleb. I think the firearms industry has come a long way, definitely in the last 10 years, of having more dealers being open to talking about secure storage and having materials about suicide prevention, injury prevention out in their shops. It's a difficult thing because the Second Amendment community hasn't always been open to conversations about secure storage because it can be connected to things that the Second Amendment doesn't always agree with. I think that's changing, but when it comes to using secure storage to keep people safe, everybody agrees that that's a good idea.
If someone's listening and they are a firearm dealer and they're curious about creating this capability to store firearms for their customers, say it's in a time of crisis or for whatever reason, what advice would you give them?
I would say to a dealer that's thinking about doing this type of work, you do have to understand the liability. You have to understand the laws that are at play in your state. Make sure that you're comfortable with everything that's involved.
In Louisiana, we actually had a law passed that absolves you or removes any implied or explicit liability for a gun shop specifically to hold a firearm for somebody. We called it just a temporary hold. We didn't say what it was for. We just said a temporary hold. That way it opened it up for so many different subjects. And it passed unanimously. And since doing that, we've grown from 4 shops to 13 across the state of Louisiana that do this. For us, removing that liability was a huge step because when I've talked to other shops, everyone's concerned about the liability. And that is the first hurdle a shop has to overcome is, am I okay with any liability that comes with this? And be it implied or explicit. Does the law afford me protection and my business protection? And it's realizing that, look, this does cost money. Whenever we take firearms in, I clean them, we maintain them, we repair them at no cost to the customer. So then the storage, the time, the processing, the inventorying them, all of that is going to weigh on your books as a shop. But it's if you really care and if you really want to make a difference, is this worth it to you?
I'm always happy to talk to dealers. I know Caleb is too, because this type of work is important to us. But I think I would also tell them there are other ways to be involved. If you're a dealer who wants to make a difference, but you don't have an appetite for that type of liability, maybe you'd take a step by including information about secure storage and the connection with time and space and kids and aging adults in your training classes. There are training slides that you can incorporate and just provide education to the community. There are other ways to get involved that help you make a difference that don't involve the level of liability that we're talking about.
Any other last thoughts that you would want to share?
This is hard. That's probably a good thing to share. Trying to make a difference, trying to make a change, doing just a firearm storage even, it's hard.
I do want to add, though, that there are benefits to the dealers. It's not all, oh, this is hard and it's risky. It is, all those things. But we've seen tangible parallel benefits to the business itself. And I think it's important for dealers to understand that as well if they're thinking about engaging in this type of work. We've really found that because we're involved in this type of work with the community, the staff members really get into it. And a lot of ours are veterans, just like Caleb's. They like working for a place that's connected to the community. They feel important. They like talking to customers about initiatives like this. It means something. They're not just shoveling French fries. And it also, sheds a positive light on your business. Let's be frank, the firearms business is not always viewed in a super positive light by everyone in the community, but people want to do business with companies that are engaged and do the right thing. And so we've taken on new customers and new members and, gotten 5-star reviews for what that's worth because people find out about these programs and they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. So there are some true business benefits, I believe, to this work, aside from the gratification you get knowing that you are making a difference.
Well, this has been an exceptionally good conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot about the interactions that go on between gun dealers and purchasers. And there's clearly a role that dealers play in creating safer environments in the home. It's because they're a trusted source of information, and that is a powerful voice when it comes to getting people to store more safely. Responsible gun ownership means storing guns securely to prevent unauthorized access, and sometimes that's you. Storing securely might just give you the time and space to change your mind and live another day. Thank you, Jacquelyn and Caleb, for being a part of this discussion.
You've been listening to Let's Talk About Your Guns. This podcast is made possible by the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine and is produced by the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress at the Uniformed Services University in collaboration with Podville Media. To learn more about our mission and for additional resources, please visit cstsonline.org. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app and leave a 5-star review. Thank you for listening. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, the U.S. government, or the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine, Incorporated. Mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, the U.S. government, or the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine, Incorporated.